knowing more than the people that you manage doesn't mean you can manage them better.
What do you see most common?
In the early stages, it's inferiority complex. That's the stress. When you asked about, like, what did I get from that CEO experience? I got white hair. I also got firsthand experience in how difficult and demanding that role always is. More often than not, people haven't really been able to articulate even to themselves that there's a fear factor driving them. Everyone in that role, especially as an organization is scaling, is gonna face some pretty significant fears along the way. And if you're always leading from a place of fear, then you're not really leading from a place of strategy.
Welcome to Tech Scenes.
Hey, thanks so much. It's nice to be in this famous car.
Well, let's start from the top. Tell me about your executive coaching practice.
The most simple way to describe what I do and who I work with is that I helped founders become CEOs. And maybe put in a different way, that work and that transition often, I would say most often, happens long after they take on the title.
So of the CEO.
Yes.
Right.
It usually happens when they come to a realization that they can't do that job on instinct alone anymore, and that the organization needs more from them.
The role of the CEO is really a craft, I think. You know, I don't think
Absolutely.
everything you do can just be natural to you because there's a lot of demands. And as an organization grows, changes, there's going to be a lot of different types of demands. And so I always kind of think of it as a craft. I have a good friend, tattoo artist, really well known. And I was asking him about art one day and the idea of art. And he's like, the word art doesn't really make sense. He's like, you know how many times I literally have drawn a hand, you know, like just a hand, you know, we're probably beyond 10,000 hours, you know, before he said he even like tattooed anything, you know, and he's like, that's craft. That's honing in, learning the skill to be able to execute and perform. And I think every role's like that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I use that word craft for the CEO role as well, because it should be one, especially as an organization scales. And you can actually see the people who have leaned into learning the craft and gotten really good at it versus those who are playing it by ear. And some people who play it by ear can do just fine.
Right.
It doesn't mean they're going to fail.
Right.
They can do just fine. But the people who have leaned into it as a craft, especially as founders, sort of move out of that founder mentality, which, I mean, founder is a title too. CEO is a job, and moved into this job, this all-encompassing job that requires so much from a person, and really started to lean into that craft. That's exactly right. That's the way I see it too.
I say this a lot, and I wrote about it in my book, but like CEO is a role, and I'd say a founder is a title. Now, there is some responsibilities that come with being a founder, but I believe that every person in the organization needs to play some sort of role, and they can't just play a founder role. Typically, that means someone that doesn't want any responsibility and kind of jump around and create chaos. And some people think they're the genius that deserves that type of ability, but
it's just my style, right? This is just me. This is who I am. This is my style, and it's worked for me, right? You hear that a lot.
Yes, and where you see the conflict of that is when there's multiple founders, right? One takes the role of the CEO, has that responsibility, that title, and then maybe there's this other kind of founder that hasn't really found a role at that stage of the company. I've seen founders not have a stage for a while and then find a great role for them at a different stage. It's not as common. Typically you see a few founders start and, maybe they kind of find where they play best. After a while, some kind of don't mature to the level of the organization's maturity. And that's where a lot of, I think, challenges occur. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen that and had to work with that quite a few times.
I've seen the founder conflicts and co-founder conflicts that arise from that. And that's in many cases where I enter into the equation. I'm usually coming in and being introduced to somebody at an inflection point.
Right.
And that somebody is always the CEO. And that inflection point is usually when they've raised a first really big round. My sweet spot is really around Series B, sometimes Series C, where a lot of things are going right in the organization and in the company. And these people have done, extraordinary things already. But when that big funding round comes in, or maybe it's a big M&A transaction that's about to happen, that's when things get really focused.
Right.
And that's when that founder, that CEO may decide that there's some cleanup work to do alongside that inflection point. And oftentimes that is a co-founder conflict that has been lingering. And that really needs to be resolved. So oftentimes I'm coming in there where we can, hit the ground running and start working on solutions for that, in order to clear the decks to then start really leveling up and growing even faster.
So I'm going to come back to that, but I do want to back up a little bit and tell me a bit about your experience. You were formerly a CEO. You brought a company public, I believe. You had a lot of variety of roles. And what were those experiences like?
They were great. They were, they were so informative to me in what I do now. And, I'd be lying if I didn't say they've enabled me to do what I do now, in terms of even giving me the freedom and flexibility to really focus on what I love. And they were just huge life lessons. And with so many sub lessons attached. I started out in the corporate world, so I feel like I got great training in how to be in an organization, especially in a large organization.
Right.
That was very useful to me, certainly as the company scaled and as we started to put a lot of systems in place.
So the first company that you took public, what stage was it at when you joined?
I was the founder.
Okay, I was not.
And I had two co-founders. Three of us were co-founders. And
but prior to that, you were more corporate, larger organizations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was with Time Warner for 10 years.
Okay.
And so, very large organization.
Yes.
Very established. And I was running various parts of the Asia operations of the company. Left when I saw this opportunity, and my co-founders and I started to build essentially a roll-up of small to mid-sized media and content companies in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong.
Okay.
There was a window to do it, and the timing worked out very well for us, and we were able to scale and grow and ultimately take first a subsidiary public, which is less common.
Right.
And then the parent company public.
Okay.
And I mean, that's
interesting.
Cocktail party version of the
Right,
story.
right.
Like, the hair turned white when I was about, I think, 34.
Okay.
And I remember the day looking into the mirror and being like, oh my God, my hair is white.
Who is this guy?
Who is this person? But that's the stress as well. So when you asked about like, what did I get from that CEO experience? I got white hair.
Yeah.
I also got firsthand experience in how difficult and demanding that role always is. I was going to say can be, but always is. It doesn't matter. Like, my experience was vastly different from anybody else's experience.
Right.
That doesn't matter. Like, the role itself is oftentimes thankless.
Yes.
And gargantuanly difficult. And then on top of that, I think isolatingly lonely. So I got all of that from my experience.
Right. I think having that empathy and understanding is so important, like when playing a role. I've had coaches in the past. I'm a big advocate of coaching. Now, there's all the analogies you can use in the world that, all great teams have a great coach. It's not a surprise. And one thing that I always have gotten a lot out of it is helpful to have a period of time and a cadence where you can reflect on your own stuff, because you're always usually dealing with everybody else's stuff. It's hard for, I think, some CEOs and executives to create some space for themselves because of all the demands. It reminds me of Brad Feld, who we both know. A lot of people know who Brad Feld is, Foundry, Techstars. He told me once, like, the role of the founder is to gather things, people, money, like, is this your partners,
a great
clients, right? Like,
yeah.
But what that really, to me, means is, like, you are always pitching people this vision of the future and getting them to join, and every single person that you add is an additional layer of responsibility, and it builds up to something that's very large and sometimes overwhelming. Fear comes in, I think, because people are afraid they're going to let all these people down on this vision that they sold. Being a coach, and I'm curious, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, like, how do you deal with someone that has tremendous amounts of maybe fear in certain areas of their work?
I think there are a lot of different types of people out there. Some people have identified and know the fear that they're feeling. Other people not.
Okay.
And in both cases, that's absolutely okay. I would say more often than not, people haven't really been able to articulate even to themselves that there's a fear factor driving them. But I would say, like, everyone in that role, especially as an organization is scaling, is gonna face some pretty significant fears along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And look, those fears can be motivating, but at the end of the day, they take their toll.
Right.
As well. And if you're always leading from a place of fear, then you're not really leading from a place of strategy. I do often spend a lot of time with people really figuring out those fears.
Yeah. How do you get to that with somebody?
It's like any interpersonal relationship. It's getting to know it's like who somebody really is.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the title. Also establishing a great degree of trust. Ideally, as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, generating trust can't be manufactured, right? So it happens at a different pace depending on the relationship. But I think fear is just so common in that role at any stage, because there are so many unknowns,
right,
all along the way.
Yeah.
And that's fine too. There's always a first time for every part of that CEO journey. There's a first fundraise.
Right.
There's a first big fundraise. There's a first board. There's a first big key hire. There's the first M&A transaction. And so many firsts along the way. And so, anyone who thinks automatically that they just know how to do these things intuitively is probably wrong.
Right.
And probably will have some degree of fear along the way.
Yeah.
I do think this is not a selling point for coaching, but it sort of is. Having a coach through that process can be just so beneficial, because a good coach isn't really going to tell you what to do. It's just going to help you explore these things in a very methodical way.
Right.
I've modeled my practice after the coach that I wished I'd had when I was a founder and CEO and had really nobody to help me, because that sort of ecosystem just didn't exist where I was building.
Right. That's interesting. So what does that look like then for you? Do you have a specific methodology that you use, or do you have kind of a baseline understanding of kind of what you want to achieve?
The way I always get asked about methodologies, and the way I think about it to myself and articulate it to others is that I have a lot of methodologies, but if things are going the way I intend them to, in the way I'm working with the client will never actually see those methodologies.
Right.
The work is the work, and I don't want the work to be too prescriptive ever, because of what we just talked about. Like,
Right.
everybody's so different. Like, one CEO style might be the gatherer, right? The person who's always externally focused and just bringing in opportunity and talent to the business, and capital too, right? Whereas somebody else might be super internally focused and very process driven, or an engineer who's learning to be an all-encompassing leader. And so imposing one methodology and like having somebody go through like a rote practice, for me just isn't how I want to do it. It's more of thinking about those things in the background, guiding conversations, making sure that we're doing the tactical stuff while we're also looking at the longer term stuff. And oftentimes the work that I shouldn't say oftentimes, always the work that I'm doing is figuring out with somebody what kind of CEO they want to be, and then helping them be that. Or helping them be something that might be a little bit more realistic given their personality and character and interests as well.
Yeah, I think it's similar to how I look at the organization as a whole too. And it's, anytime that I meet someone, it's more, for me, it's like a discovery call or conversation to kind of understand where they're at and where they want to be, and that gap. Where's that gap? And where are those challenges, right? Like, call it like standard like management consulting or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like, what's that gap analysis, right? Like, we know where we're at, we know where we want to be, or maybe we need help clarifying where we want to go, right? Doing that with a CEO for me, and then doing it with their leadership team, and really defining that. For me, it's about defining focal points, and I have a lot of different methodologies that we use as well. Unlike you, I have to like teach the methodologies to the teams, because I need everybody to kind of lean into the methodology. It is flexible. I think that's the other thing that is important, because I totally hear what you're saying too. You have to be flexible and know where to say yes or no, or maybe. I have some teams that want to do it this way, and as long as I can get the result that I want, we can do it however we want to do it. But my result usually is trying to create clarity, and clarity around focal points, clarity around the mission, the vision, the highest level, right? But then we like to like create like a 3-year vision with the team, like where are we going at a high level. It could be like 5 objectives 3 years out, and then the 1-year plan, which is really 5 objectives, but then 3 to 5 objectives within each team that's part of that leadership team, just to create that, again, that focal point for the leadership team, and then each team under that. And then we break up 90 days OKRs, and we have metrics as well, and separate all that. But it's just trying to get clarity on all those things, so we know where we're going, what we need to do, who's going to do it, how we're going to attempt to do it, and then have a cadence of doing that annually, quarterly, and have a weekly meeting that kind of pulls it together. For me, I don't know why, and we talked about this in the past, I don't know why I was brought here to do this, but it's very clear that this is, like a passion, something I had to figure out with these organizations. And I've been in a lot of organizations early on when I was younger, after I sold my first business, where I was a chief of staff. At first I thought, man, this position's a little not at my level. I was doing much bigger things before that, but I was really interested and tasked with figuring out how to like bring an organization together, doing something that's never been done before. So I think it'd be very easy if someone's going to, start like a chain of dental shops or plumbing company or whatever, something that's been done before. But I think where you work and where I work is oftentimes people kind of at the front of the frontier, right? Like trying to do these things. Not everything has been done before. So how do you coach someone through that, or how do you assemble a team in that case? And I think there are tools, but they're not as clear to people as other things are, I think.
I think that's very true. And you touched on 2 points which I would pull apart. One is, I think, process and methodologies. And I think, and I've read your book, by the way, and love it, and probably repeat back stuff and don't realize it's yours. I think it's mine. But
that's great. I love that. Keep
but
doing
it. But it's cool talking to you because we have slightly different areas of focus where you're primarily focused on teams, and I'm predominantly focused on the one-on-one, the founder, that CEO.
Right.
And so I pull apart one thing, which is the methodologies, where I read your book, and I think having methodologies is actually fundamentally important to driving teams and teamwork, because there are best practices and there are organizational structures that just work, right? And obviously, like, you built your own, which work even better. But I think, when you're setting up OKRs, right, for instance, there are ways to do that and there are ways not to do that.
Oh, yeah.
There
are better ways to do that than there's that.
We could probably talk about that forever, and that's not my thing, right? Like,
right.
I'll work with the CEO on the issues that arise from the OKRs, and from the teams either hitting or not hitting the OKRs, or outperforming or underperforming, but not really setting them up. That's a different skill set. One, I just wanted to touch on that. I think methodologies in what you do is fundamentally important to what you do. And then the second part that you started to talk about, and I don't think you got there, but it's the calling part, where it's, in previous conversations with you, it sounded like this, moving into coaching the way that you did was really a calling for you.
Right.
And a real true passion. And I don't think it has to be that for a coach to be good. I don't think it has to be a calling. But I think when it is a calling, the work is phenomenal, for both sets of people, for the coach and the client or clients. And for me, it took me really a long time to figure out that was the calling for me.
Yeah.
You'll talk to other people in our ecosystems who will be like, well, I coach too.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I do.
I can facilitate a team. I can lead a session.
I think there is a lot of coach-like activity,
right,
in the worlds that we operate in. But that interest alignment with a team or a leader is so important. You don't get that anywhere else,
right,
unless you're working with a coach.
Yeah. So that leads me to ask you, like, why for you? Like, why coaching for you? And I know that you did a fund. You've done some other things. You can be a CEO of a company right now if you wanted to be. Maybe just not work at all. Why coaching for you? Like, what do you think that is?
I think over the years, having been an operator in a large corporate setting, and then a builder and operator in startup to scale up setting, being a venture investor as well, has put me around so many people who are building. And I think probably most simply put, really smart people trying to do really hard things.
Yeah.
And what I've learned along the way is that my experiences, the specific experience that I've had, aren't always the most helpful. But the experiences of having gone through it, right, is extraordinarily helpful because it gives you a shorthand very early on. Like, I do know what it's like to have been a founder. I know the depths of loneliness that one experiences. I know the despair of success. It's a whole other topic we could talk about.
Right.
But I've also known the really high highs and the gratification that you get for building something meaningful. And along the way, I've just been picking up so many best practices. And what I found is that I just love helping really smart people do those really hard things. And I love it more than running a company myself. I think I'm actually better at coaching CEOs than I was as a CEO, for sure.
Interesting.
I've learned so much since then, and
Right.
I mean, looking back on it, there's so many things I did wrong. For a long time, I blamed myself, and that's a tough spiral to get into. But ultimately, some things went right, and that's great when that happens. It doesn't always work out that way. But I guess coming back to the point, I know that I'm just so much better at working with and coaching other CEOs than I have at actually being in that job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I not only do I coach teams and do my work with like leadership teams in their organization, but I also coach sports, and I've been around sports quite a bit.
Wrestling, right?
Yeah, wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I coached hockey for many years too. Right now it's wrestling and jiu-jitsu, but there is a level of confidence, and when it's not ego, I believe. Even practicing jiu-jitsu for 16 years, and at different levels, you have different belts and stuff like that. It takes a long time to get it, but you do have like a confidence that you over time just kind of build. If I'm gonna go compete against somebody, like in my head, I'm just like, I just know like what I'm gonna do and what I'm not gonna allow them to do. It's like off limits for them to try that to me. Not that I can't get beat or whatever, but like there's this like, I think, built-in confidence. I have that when I work with teams because I see the same things over and over again, and I know it's this repetition creates this consistency, and repetition creates confidence.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
the more you see, and believe me, I always see something new every single time. Don't get me wrong, there's always something new.
Of course.
But it, like, I think it's not an ego thing to say, like, I do know I'm good at this. I trust and believe when you say I'm better at this than I was. See, I trust that you know that you're good at this. And I think it takes a long time to get there. I think it takes a long time for people to get there. And not that at every moment of every conversation, I'm sure that you're like brimming with like confidence, because I'm sure there's sometimes
there's edge cases. No, right?
Yeah.
You can't pretend to know you can't pretend to know your way around every situation that you find yourself in with a founder client. You just can't.
Right.
And if you think you do, you're very wrong, and you're not serving them well.
Right.
And you know this as well as I do. It's actually not about knowing the thing better than the founder or the client. They're gonna know the thing much better than you. It's about being riding shotgun with somebody, and being that really helpful companion along the way through the journey.
Right.
Sometimes that's giving a little bit of direction when you're super confident.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's getting the snacks. I think it would be wrong to say that one could know every situation that they're going to be in and be really good in those situations.
Right.
You have to admit that you don't know.
Yeah.
And then find frameworks for making the best decisions, and that is what can truly help a client. Because especially in the velocity of the role,
Right.
There's usually not time to sit down and make really good, smart, strategic decisions.
Right.
And so part of the coaching work that I really love doing is helping people create that time and really make their best decisions, and then really exercise that muscle of being able to make their best decisions along the way, because that is the craft of being a CEO.
Yeah. I think cadence is really important, and that's one thing that I kind of discovered in the process over the last late 90s. I started doing this. is that cadence is so important. It's like working out. Like, a lot of people are like, hey, I'm gonna start January off hard and go to the gym, and then they fade out by February, right? Or they have this great plan January 1st, and then they just kind of fizzle out. But that cadence of keep on showing up, modifying the plan, iterating it, updating it, moving it forward, it's living, it's breathing. Like, I think that when you said creating that space and that time, I think creating that space and time in a consistent manner is like everything. And I think when people don't feel like they're in control of their environment or the organization, it's because they lack cadence. Even from, I always like to say, I work with teams from idea to exit. Oftentimes there's a lot of more around, organizations that are like 25 or 150 and 250 employees is where I kind of spend most of my time. But that idea from idea to exit, there's a lot of different variability of systems and methodologies. You can over systematize early on, you can under systematize later on, but they don't write that in books, and it's very hard. And I tried in some aspect, like at what level and scale, but you have to kind of be in there. And I think that's where it goes back to the craft, I think, is and it helps to have someone, side by side like you are, with someone to kind of help them think through, I think, some of those things. Is that important now or not? And I think you being, that's why I was real curious. And I kind of knew ahead of time, but like that you've been in large organizations and you started something from, zero. I think having that stale expertise is really helpful for people, because not everybody has that going into the role. And sometimes they've just been in big companies, or they've only been in companies that never grew past 100 people.
Yep.
Right? And
that's right.
The world's a little bit different.
Oh, for sure. It's very different. And especially, coming back to where I get involved, usually at that growth stage. If they're venture backed, it's usually at that sort of Series B, Series C stage.
Right.
And, they might be 100 employees. They might be 200 or 500. But the kind of work that we start doing is to really start putting the foundations in place for leaders that scale and teams and companies that scale.
Yeah.
So I'm working with clients on thinking about, how does this scale to 5,000 people? How are we building something that can actually easily grow without the suffering that most people go through when they're trying to build an organization?
I think that's the biggest thing. Is I think what drew me to this work is that it doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be this painful. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things that are low-hanging fruit to make things easier. That people just don't know because they haven't been there before.
Absolutely. And look, some degree of suffering is going to be inevitable.
Yeah. What do you see most common? Like, what are the things that you kind of encounter most common?
I do think in the early stages, it's inferiority complex a lot. We all face it. Like, let's be honest, we all face that.
Like, to be an example.
I'll give you a great example. A founder who has never had another job before. They've been extraordinarily successful. They're really good at what they do. They're really smart. They've built an organization with co-founders, or maybe not, that has grown and been well funded, and they finally raised like a big, meaningful round. And at this inflection point, now they have the mandate, the necessity, and the capital to go out and hire like real domain experts, right? But this is that founder's first job. They've never had another job before,
right?
And now they're going to go out and hire like career domain experts who have been in the domain for maybe twice the time that founder has been in, and probably in very large roles. And now this founder has the resources to go recruit them. But my gosh, that's daunting.
Right.
That's really daunting. If this is your first job out of college, or it started in college,
right?
And now you're going to not only go recruit those people, interview them, but then later manage them and lead them.
Right.
How do you do that? So I think that's probably the best.
And how do you do
like,
that
start
confidently? Yeah.
example? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Well, it's leaning into what you're good at. I mean, and it's also learning that, you know, when you hire these people, number one, oftentimes they haven't been in a startup atmosphere. So we could talk for an hour about the inherent risks of that, right? There's a risk factor there. But let's just say you overcome the risk factor. Then it's, you know, learning what to let them do because they're so good at it, and obviously like they're going to bring a network into the role as well, which is oftentimes what you're bringing them in for, is not just their knowledge, but their network of people. Right. And learning how to delegate stuff, and learning how to not pretend that you know everything. Mm-hmm. Knowing more than the people that you manage doesn't mean you can manage them better at all, ever.
Say that again. Say that again.
Oh, I don't think I could. But I'll say it in a different way. I think once you get to the point as a founder or a CEO or both, and you realize that you really don't need to be, and frankly, don't want to be the smartest person in the room. Yeah. And that you want to be surrounded by people who are smarter than you and better at their jobs than you. Right. That's when you can really start running fast.
Yeah. And you still and if you're doing it right, you still deserve being in the room. You're still needed.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of the best managers out there. Think of the best founders who led and scaled their organizations. Think about Steve Jobs.
Right.
Not always the smartest person in the room.
Right.
Think about Zuckerberg, who's had so much staying power. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether you like him or don't like him, the guy has learned how to be a CEO, to learn how to delegate, and learn how to hire really smart people who are way smarter than him.
What do you think is really important in the work that you do that people often don't talk about?
Having somebody with you for part of the journey, or an important part of the journey. Just having them with you when they can bring a confident source of sometimes guidance, sometimes decision-making, support, and actually oftentimes just like really good listening. Mm-hmm. With an understanding of what you're trying to do and what your obstacles are, and maybe what some best practices or solutions are, can be everything. And it can be that simple.
Yeah.
Right? Because this role that we're talking about, we spent this car ride talking about, is so difficult and so challenging. It's a fantastic role. It's the best job in the world. But it's also one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Right.
And it's not taught. And you can't really go to school for it. Even if you go to business school, you're not learning how to be a CEO.
No.
I don't think there are classes taught on how to be a CEO. Just having a person who's not your investor, who's not your co-founder, who's not your well-meaning friend, mm-hmm. Who doesn't have context, and frankly, who's not your spouse or partner, because a lot gets offloaded into the home life that we haven't even talked about.
That'd be hard too.
It's been great to have that support and help. I think can be everything. Mm-hmm. And everything on top of that we just talked about is the icing on the cake.
Right. Yeah, to have someone there present.
Mm-hmm.
Well said. Well said.
Thanks.
All right. Last question. More of a scenario.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most important question I'm going to ask you all day. Most important question you've ever been asked in your life. Okay, maybe not. Here's the scenario. You're trapped on a desert island the rest of your life. You have food, you have water, you have everything you need, healthcare, whatever you need. You have everything. But you are missing one thing. There is no entertainment at all on this island. None. However, an old 80s boombox drifts ashore with unlimited batteries, but you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life.
Oh man.
And it doesn't have to be 80s, it just has to be 80s boombox. Any era, any genre, one album, the rest of your life. What are you gonna bring?
All right, I'm gonna give the nerdy, probably unpopular answer that might get me kicked off of this show or out of this car.
I don't think that's possible.
But I'm gonna bring Mahler's Fourth Symphony.
Oh.
It might have thrown you a curveball. I'm a classical music fan. I like all genres of music, but if I had to sit and listen to one piece of music over and over again, it would be that.
I don't know if I know what that is.
It makes me, it still brings me to tears when I hear it.
That is a, really? How do you spell it?
Mahler.
Gustav Mahler.
At the end. I can play you fifth. Oh, not coming up. It's not coming up with
Very nice though. It only likes the ninth. Are you sure it exists?
Is this Apple Music?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna play you a different Mahler just so you can hear it.
One of my favorite things to do is to listen to music like this and go through a car wash where you actually stay in the car wash.
Oh, it's very fun.
Because all the different things that are happening, it feels...
And it just feels like there's so much... It's orchestration. My wife is a classical musician.
Really?
And yeah.
What does she play?
Piano.
Oh, wow.
And she used to perform and tour, and so we listened to a lot of classical music. And I've liked it before I met her.
Right.
And then gotten deeper.
That's awesome.
With her, but
no one's ever answered this question or given me that answer. So I'm gonna find the fourth. I'm gonna listen on the way home. But thanks for joining me. Great talk.
This was great.
I would say part one, because I think there's a lot more we can talk about.
We only scratched the surface, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.